They thought she was just a frail old woman, easy to discard like the dry leaves of autumn. Jessica watched her life be locked away, while the man who stole it laughed in her face. He made one fatal mistake. He left her near the old orchard. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jessica's mother had been keeping a secret in that orchard for 60 years. A secret she had sewn into the lining of an old gardening apron, waiting for the one person it was meant for. What Jessica found under those roots will make you believe that a mother's love does not end at the grave. And what happened the following morning when the machines arrived to tear down the trees left an entire county without words. If you believe that the truth always finds its way home, hit that subscribe button right now and join our community. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories that prove it. Now, let's begin. The farm on Kettle Creek Road had been in the family for 3 generations, which meant it had been in the family longer than the county road that ran past it, longer than the feed store in town that everyone used as a landmark, longer than most of the trees except the apple orchard on the south side of the property. The orchard had been planted by Jessica's mother, Abigail, in the summer. Jessica turned 14, and it had outlasted everything. The hard winters of the 60s, the drought of 1988, the ice storm of 1989, the slow attrition of time that takes things from you, whether you are paying attention or not. The orchard had outlasted them all, and it had outlasted Abigail herself, and Jessica had tended it for 60 years in her mother's name. Jessica Marsh had lived on this farm for all of her 74 years, which was not something many people could say about anywhere anymore. She had been born in the back bedroom, the one with the window that caught the morning light, and had grown up in these rooms, and married Robert Marsh at 23, and raised 2 children here, and buried Robert 3 years ago in the churchyard 4 miles down the road, and had continued, because the farm required continuing, and because she was the kind of woman who continued. The farm was hers. This had never been a question. Robert had understood it, had always understood it the way people understand the ground rules of a life they have entered into willingly. The farm was Jessica's, had been Jessica's mother's before her, would be Jessica's daughter's when the time came. The deed was in the county records. The history was in the land itself, in the way the fields had been managed, and the orchard tended, and the house maintained through the years by the women who had lived here. W.D.E. Pewitt arrived on a Wednesday morning in September, which was a morning Jessica had planned to spend picking the last of the late-season tomatoes. The garden was at its end of summer best, the tomatoes heavy, the late beans still producing, the herbs gone to seed in the way that meant she would have seeds for next year. She was in the middle of this when she heard the truck come down the drive. She looked up. It was a truck she did not recognize. Large knew the kind of truck that costs more than the equipment on her barn, driven by a man she had not seen in perhaps 15 years, and would not have recognized on the street without prompting. Wade was the son of a cousin of Robert's. The family connection attenuated enough that Jessica had never used the word relative without some internal qualification. He had been at Robert's funeral briefly, standing at the edge of the gathering with the particular expression of someone performing presence. She had thanked him for coming. She had not thought about him again. He got out of the truck with a folder under his arm and a man she did not know who carried a briefcase and had the expression of someone employed to appear authoritative and who was managing this with practiced adequacy. They stood in her driveway with the ease of people who have done this before. "Jessica," Wade said. He said her name with the easy familiarity of someone who has been practicing a conversation and has decided that first names establish a tone that serves his purpose. "Wade," she said.
She set down the basket she had been carrying. He explained the situation with the fluency of someone who has rehearsed the explanation and is delivering it rather than having it. The explanation involved Robert's estate, a will that had apparently been prepared some years before his death and that superseded the arrangements Jessica had understood to be in place, provisions that had been made without her knowledge for reasons the document would explain, and the summary conclusion that the property on Kettle Creek Road was to be transferred to Wade Pewitt as the named beneficiary. She asked to see the document. She read it carefully. standing in her own yard with Wade and the attorney watching in the way she read everything methodically from the beginning without skipping. She had learned this from her mother, who had said more than once that the difference between the people who got taken advantage of and the people who did not was whether they read what they were signing. She read it twice. The language was formal and dense in the way of legal documents designed to obscure rather than clarify. But she had managed farm accounts and contracts and the paperwork of a working farm for 50 years, and she understood what she was reading. She understood it very clearly. It was not Robert's signature. She had looked at Robert's signature on documents for 49 years, and she knew it the way she knew his face. What was on this page was a careful approximation, the work of someone who had studied the original and reproduced it with attention, but not quite with the truth. She said this calmly, directly, without raising her voice. WDE's expression did not change in the way of someone's surprise. It changed in the way of someone who has anticipated this response and has decided how to manage it. He said the document had been notarized. He said she was understandably upset, but the legal process was clear. He said the man with the briefcase was an attorney who could answer any questions she had about the process. The attorney said what attorneys say when they are on the wrong side of something and know it, and have decided to continue anyway. By noon, there were 2 additional men from WDE's truck who had begun moving through the house with the systematic efficiency of people performing an inventory. By 2 o'clock, the locks had been changed on the front door, while Jessica stood in the yard and watched. By 3 o'clock, Wade was standing on the porch of the house that had been in her family for 3 generations, looking at her with the particular expression of a man who believes he has won. "You're welcome to take what you can carry," he said. "I'd suggest making it quick. I have people coming tomorrow to start clearing the Southfield, the orchard." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she could say and what would be useful to say and what the difference was between those 2 things. She had spent 74 years understanding that difference, and she had learned that the most powerful response to something like this was not the one that expressed the full measure of her feelings, but the one that moved the situation in the direction she intended. "The apron," she said. "My mother's apron. It's on the hook in the kitchen." He went inside and came back with it. He held it out without ceremony, the way you hand someone something you consider worthless. She took it. She folded it over her arm. Then she turned and walked south toward the orchard. Because there was nowhere else to go, and because the orchard had always been where she went, when she needed to think behind her, she heard Wade say something to the man with the briefcase. She heard him laugh. She kept walking. The apple orchard covered roughly 3 acres on the south side of the farm, running from the fence line at the road to the creek at the back of the property. Abigail had planted it the summer Jessica turned 14, had planted it herself, with Jessica beside her, the 2 of them setting each tree into the ground, with the focused care of someone who understands that they are making a decision for decades rather than seasons. Abigail had called them iron trees. This was not a variety name, but a personal one, her way of acknowledging the particular hardiness of the apple stock she had chosen. A heritage variety she had sourced from an elderly orchardist in the next county who had been growing them since before the war. Trees that produced a small, dense, intensely flavored apple that was not beautiful by commercial standards, but that kept through the winter and made a cider unlike anything Jessica had tasted from any other source. The orchard had not been well for some years. This was a grief Jessica carried quietly, the knowledge that the trees Abigail had planted with such intention were declining in ways that she had not been able to prevent. She had consulted. She had tried remedies. She had given the orchard the same attention she gave everything, and the trees had continued their slow withdrawal. The leaves came sparse in spring. The fruit, when it came, was small, even by its own modest standards. several trees had not leafed out at all this past season. WDE's assessment, the Southfield, something to be cleared, was not wrong about the appearance of the orchard. He was wrong about everything else, which was the particular wrongness of a man who could look at a living thing and see only what it was worth to cut down. Jessica walked through the orchard gate and stopped. The trees stood around her in the September afternoon, their branches mostly bare, the light coming through them at the angle of early autumn that made even bare branches look like something. She had walked through this orchard 10,000 times. She knew every tree, could have named the order in which they had been planted, could have told you which ones had produced the best fruit in which years, and which had always been slower than the others, and which had survived the ice storm of 1989 that had taken 3 of the oldest. She walked through the orchard slowly, with the specific attention of someone who has been away from a place they love, and is relearning its particular quality. The trees stood around her in their September state, mostly bare, the late light coming through the thinned branches at angles that made them look almost architectural, the structure of a thing that has been growing for 60 years, revealing itself more clearly when the leaves are gone than when they are present. She walked to the center. The central tree was the first one Abigail had planted, the one she had put in the ground before any of the others, establishing the heart of the arrangement from which everything else radiated. It was the largest tree, or had been. It was now reduced, its crown thinned, several major branches gone to the disease that had been working through the orchard. But the trunk was still substantial, the root system still anchoring deeply into the Tennessee clay. And when Jessica put her hand on the bark, it was still warm from the afternoon sun, in the way that living things are warm. She sat down at the base of the tree, with her back against the trunk, the way she had sat as a child, while Abigail read to her. Her mother had read to her here through summers and autumns, the two of them against this trunk with the orchard around them and the farm beyond it, and the particular quality of Tennessee afternoons that made everything feel both immediate and eternal. She held the apron in her lap. It was old, older than she remembered looking. The fabric had the translucency of cloth that has been washed hundreds of times over decades, the faded blue of a color that had once been strong. There were stains that no amount of washing had fully removed, the accumulated record of a life spent in a garden and a kitchen. She could smell, or thought she could smell, the faint ghost of lavender that had been Abigail's particular scent, the lavender water she had made herself every summer from the plants in the kitchen garden. She pressed the apron to her face and breathed in. The lavender was there, faint, nearly gone, but present in the way that scents embedded in fabric over decades of use do not entirely disappear. It was enough. The ghost of her mother's particular scent held in the worn fibers of a garment that had been on her body through thousands of ordinary days. She allowed herself for a few minutes to grieve, not strategically, not as a managed process, but the real thing, the compound grief of a woman who had lost her husband and now her home, and was sitting in the orchard her dead mother had planted, holding her dead mother's apron, with no clear path forward. She allowed it because she had learned in 74 years that grief is not a problem to be solved, but a passage to be moved through, and that moving through it quickly was not the same as moving through it well. After a while, the grief settled into the particular stillness that comes after it, the clarity that arrives when the acute wave has passed. She looked down at the apron. She was running her hands along the hem, an automatic gesture, the kind of physical habit that hands develop without the mind directing them. When she felt it, something hard, small, sewn into the fabric of the hem, in the fold of the stitching, invisible unless you were looking for it, or unless your hands found it, the way hands find things they were meant to find. She held the hem up to the afternoon light, a small shape enclosed in the fabric. She worked the stitching carefully with her fingernails. the way her mother had taught her to work delicate things, slowly, without force, finding the give rather than creating it. The hem opened, and a small bronze key fell into her palm. She sat with the key in her hand for a long moment. It was old, not antique old in the way of things preserved carefully, but old in the way of things that have been used and kept. The bronze worn smooth at the edges, the key's profile simple and specific. It fit a lock she did not immediately recognize, but it had the quality of something made to fit a specific lock and no other. She turned it over. On the flat of the key's head, barely visible, someone had scratched a small symbol. A tree, she thought, simple and unmistakable. 2 lines for trunk and a curve for crown. She looked at the apron again. She had unstitched the hem to release the key, and in doing so she had opened a fold she had not noticed before, a small pocket in the lining, sewn shut with the careful stitching of someone who intended it to stay closed for a long time. She worked this open too. Inside was a piece of paper folded small and wrapped in a scrap of oilskin that had kept it dry through whatever years it had been there. The paper was yellowed and fragile at the folds in the way of old paper that had been folded and left folded, but it held when she opened it carefully. The handwriting was Abigail's. She would have known it anywhere. The particular forward slant. The letters formed with the deliberate care of a woman who had taught herself to write well and had never stopped taking the act seriously. She had read her mother's handwriting on recipes and letters and notes left on the kitchen table her entire life. She read it now in the September orchard with the light changing around her. "My sweet Jessica, by the time you find this, I will be gone. I have sewn this key into the hem of this apron because I know you will keep the apron the way you keep everything that matters, carefully and close. And I know that someday you will need what the key opens, though I pray it is not from desperate circumstances. Under our tree, the first one I planted, the heart of the orchard, there is a box. It has been there since 1952. You must dig at the east side of the roots, where the largest root meets the trunk above ground. At the place where the bark has always grown in a curve that looks like a closed eye, inside the box is what I saved. Not money, my darling. I never had money to save. What I saved was something I believed mattered more, and something I believed would protect you if you ever needed protecting. The land is yours. It has always been yours. I made certain of it. The roots that feed us are the same roots that protect us. I have always believed this. I have built my whole life on it. And I built your inheritance on it too. Find the box.
Read every single letter with care. Trust what you find. All of my love across whatever distance separates us. Your mother, Abigail." Jessica read the letter twice, then a third time. Then she folded it back into the oilskin and put it in the pocket of her shirt close to her body. She looked at the central tree. The first one planted the heart of the orchard. She looked at its base at the roots that rose above the ground before disappearing into the soil. She found the east side. She found the largest root where it met the trunk where the bark grew in the curve her mother had described. She saw it immediately. Had probably seen it 10,000 times without registering it as a landmark. The way you see things so often they become invisible. She did not have a shovel. She had her hands. She began to dig. The Tennessee clay was hard with September dryness, which made the digging difficult and slow. She worked with her hands and with a flat rock she found nearby, loosening the soil at the east side of the root where her mother had directed her, working carefully so as not to damage the root system more than necessary. She had been digging for perhaps 20 minutes when her fingers found something that was not soil and not root. She cleared the surface carefully. Metal, the top of a container, its surface rough with decades of soil contact but intact. She worked around it, finding the edges, understanding its dimensions. larger than she had expected, rectangular, heavy when she tested it. It took another 20 minutes to free it sufficiently to lift. When she finally worked it clear of the soil and set it on the ground beside her, she sat back and looked at it. It was a military ammunition box, the kind used in the Second World War, heavy-gauge steel designed to be airtight and waterproof and durable under field conditions. Someone had wrapped it additionally in what had been a leather saddlebag. The leather now stiff with age, but still largely intact. The combination of metal and leather. Having done exactly what her mother intended it to do, keep what was inside safe through 60 years of Tennessee seasons, she worked the leather loose. The metal box beneath was sealed with a clasp, and the clasp's lock was the particular size and shape of the bronze key in her hand. She turned the key in the lock. The clasp released with the sound of something that has been closed for a very long time opening for the first time. Inside, wrapped in oilskin that had preserved them from moisture, were bundles of envelopes, many bundles, each tied with a piece of kitchen string that had dried and stiffened over the decades. The envelopes were of various ages and sizes, addressed in different hands, some formal, some barely legible, some in the careful block letters of people for whom writing was effortful. They were addressed to Abigail Crane, which had been her mother's maiden name, at the farm address on Kettle Creek Road. She lifted the first bundle and opened one envelope carefully. The letter inside was dated October 1945. It was from a man named Thomas W. Aldridge, Sergeant, United States Army. It was written from a veterans' hospital in Georgia, where he was recovering from wounds sustained in France. He wrote to thank a woman, Abigail Crane, who had written to him every month for 2 years while he was overseas, who had sent packages of food and small useful items, and who had, he wrote, kept him connected to the idea of home when home felt impossibly far away. He wrote that he did not know how to repay her except with gratitude, which he offered in full. He wrote that he was enclosing a small token, a silver dollar from the year of his birth, 1920, as a way of marking the occasion of his survival. She found the coin in the envelope, smooth and cool between her fingers. She opened another, a letter from a woman named Clara, dated 1962, thanking Abigail for helping her family through a winter when Clara's husband had been sick and the farm was failing for the meals left at the door.
For the money tucked into the meal basket, without comment or expectation of return, a coin enclosed, a walking Liberty $50, Clara wrote, that had belonged to her grandmother, and that she wanted Abigail to have as a keepsake of the kindness between them. Bundle after bundle, letter after letter, soldiers, families, neighbors, strangers who had become known through kindness, people whose lives had intersected with Abigail's through the years of her generosity. A woman in Kentucky, whose children Abigail had fed through a winter she had not mentioned to anyone. A soldier from Iowa who had received letters every month for 2 years and had cried when he read them, he wrote, because they sounded like his mother. An elderly man in the next county, whose crops had failed, and who had found one morning that someone had left feed and seed on his porch without a note. A generosity Jessica was understanding as she read that had been entirely private, entirely uncelebrated, entirely her mother's own. Jessica had known her mother as a kind woman. She had not known the scale of it. She had not known that her mother had been writing to soldiers overseas for years, had been feeding families through hard winters, and had been quietly and consistently doing the work of care that does not appear in any record because it was never meant to. And each letter had brought a coin, some silver dollars, some $50, some foreign coins from the soldiers stationed abroad, a few gold coins of various denominations from years and events she could not immediately place. Hundreds of coins in total, each one a thank you, each one a record of a kindness rendered and received. She was still reading when she found the envelope at the bottom of the box, not bundled with the others, separate, sealed with wax that had hardened over the decades, addressed in her mother's handwriting to Jessica specifically. She broke the wax seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a property deed. The original deed to the farm on Kettle Creek Road, registered in the county records on the 14th of March, 1952, in the name of Abigail Ruth Crane, with a notation attached that established the property in a family trust of specific terms. The trust terms were handwritten in the margin of a second document in the formal language of the period, but clear in its intent. The property was held in perpetual trust for the female lineage of the Crane family to pass from mother to daughter in direct line, and could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered by any means other than the consent of the current female heir. The trust had been witnessed and notarized by a county judge, and was, as far as Jessica could determine in the September orchard, with the light beginning to go, entirely valid. Her name was on it. Not Robert's name, not W.D.E.'s name, hers. Jessica Jane Cranemarsh, daughter of Abigail Ruth Crane, sole heir of the Crane Family Trust. She sat for a long time with the documents in her hands. Above her in the apple tree that her mother had planted first, the iron tree, the heart of the orchard, the tree she had sat against as a child, while Abigail read to her. A single late apple, small and dense, and the particular color of old gold, turned slowly in the September wind. She thought about her mother spending 60 years keeping this secret in the ground. She thought about the patience of that, the patience of a woman who trusted that the person she had prepared this for would find it when they needed it. She thought about the apron worn through decades of use, the key sewn into the hem so carefully that no amount of washing or wearing had revealed it. She thought about what Wade had said. The land now belongs to those who know how to profit, not to those who plant old trees. She sat for a long time with the documents, reading them again in the fading September light, making sure she understood every term and every provision. The trust language was from another era, formal in the way of 1952 legal documents, the words of a judge who had written this with care, but it was clear. Her mother had been clear about what she wanted, and had found someone who could make it legally precise. She looked at the document in her hands. She looked up at the apple. She began to understand what she was going to do in the morning. She did not sleep in the farmhouse that night. The farmhouse was locked. The locks were changed by someone who had no right to change them, and she was not going to break a window to enter her own home. Not because she was incapable of it, but because that was not how she operated, and because the situation, however extreme, did not require it. She had what she needed. She had the documents and the key and the knowledge of what was in the box. She had the orchard. She had the night, and the night was sufficient. She slept in the orchard, which she had not done since she was 12 years old, when she and a friend had convinced themselves it was an adventure, and had woken at 3 o'clock in the morning, convinced of exactly the opposite. At 74, she found it more manageable than she had at 12. She had the apron for warmth, which was not much warmth, but was something. She had the ammunition box, its contents secured, placed between the roots of the central tree where it had rested for 60 years. She had the documents tucked inside her shirt against her skin, where they would stay until morning. She did not cry again. She had done her crying at the base of the tree, and she was done with it. Not because the situation did not warrant more, but because crying was not what the situation required now. What the situation required was thinking, and she was good at thinking, and the orchard was a good place to do it. She thought about the documents. She thought about what they meant legally and what she would need to establish that meaning to someone who could act on it. She thought about Patricia Halt, the county clerk, who had worked at the courthouse for 30 years, and who had known Jessica's family all her life, and who had once told Jessica at a church fundraiser that she had known Robert's first cousin, Wade Pewitt, and found him unimpressive in the specific way of people who substitute confidence for substance. She thought about Sheriff Dan Briley, who had also grown up in this county, and who had been in school with Jessica's daughter, and who had the manner of a man who took his responsibilities seriously and did not like being made a fool of. She thought about the coins. She did not know what they were worth, had never been a person with knowledge of numismatics, but she knew that coins could be valuable, and that valuable coins required someone who knew how to evaluate them. She thought about the man in Cookville who had a shop on the main street and a sign in the window that said, "Coins bought, sold, appraised," and who had been recommended to her years ago by someone at the feed store for exactly this kind of question. She organized these thoughts into a list, the way she had organized things her whole life, items in sequence, each one dependent on the one before, each one moving her toward the outcome she intended.
When the list was complete in her mind, she went through it once more from the beginning to confirm the sequence. And then she set it aside and let herself be in the orchard night without the list, because the list was done. And what remained was the other thing. She thought about her mother. Abigail had died 11 years ago at 89, in the same back bedroom where Jessica had been born, died as she had lived, without drama and without complaint, having given her full attention to the world until she could no longer do so. Jessica had been with her. She had held her hand. She thought about the scale of what she had found in the box, the hundreds of letters, the soldiers overseas, the families through hard winters, the quiet accumulation of kindness over decades. Her mother had done all of this without telling anyone, without seeking recognition, without wanting anything in return except the coins, and even those she had kept not for their value, but as a record, as the physical proof of connections made and sustained across the years of her life. Abigail had fed soldiers and hungry families, and kept their gratitude in a box under a tree for 60 years. She had done this while also managing a farm and raising a daughter, and being a neighbor and a church member, and all the other things a woman of her time and place was expected to be. She had done this in the spaces that no one was watching. Jessica sat with this understanding through the long September night. And what arrived with the understanding was not sadness, but something closer to resolve. The specific resolve of a woman who has discovered that she comes from someone larger than she had known, and who intends to be worthy of that lineage. She watched the stars move. She listened to the orchard, the particular night sounds of trees and soil, and the creek at the back of the property. At some point, before dawn, she slept, leaning against the trunk of the central tree, the apron around her shoulders. She woke to birdsong and the particular gray that precedes first light in the Tennessee hills, the world present but not yet lit. She lay still for a moment, aware of the ground under her and the tree behind her and the orchard around her, and she felt with the specific clarity of waking in an unexpected place exactly where she was and what she intended to do. She got up. She brushed the soil from her clothes as well as she could. She straightened the apron and put it on properly, tied it at the back, the way her mother had always worn it, the ties looped twice and knotted at the front. She picked up the documents. She looked at the central tree one more time in the early light. Then she walked out of the orchard toward the road. She reached Patricia Holt's house at 7:15 after 2 miles on the county road in the early morning, with the documents tucked inside her shirt and the ammunition box under her arm. The walk had taken 40 minutes, and she had used the time to order her thoughts into the sequence she intended to follow. Patricia was already up. She was always already up, a woman of habit and early hours who had told Jessica once that sleeping past 6 felt like a surrender. And she opened the door with the expression of someone who has seen something unexpected and is taking a moment to assess it fully before responding. "Jessica," she said. "Patricia," Jessica said, "I need your help, and I need to use your phone." Patricia Holt was the county clerk. She had spent 30 years working with property records and legal documents, which meant she had a practiced eye for the difference between authentic documentation and its approximations. She read the trust document and the original deed while Jessica drank coffee at her kitchen table, and she read them with the focused attention of someone who is not going to say anything until she is certain of what she is saying. When she finished, she looked up. "This is valid," she said. "This trust was registered. I don't have the records in front of me, but I know our archive goes back to the 40s, and I know this notation format. This is real." She paused. Wade Puitt's document, by contrast. She stopped. "Is not," Jessica said. Patricia agreed with the particular directness of a woman who has spent 30 years distinguishing between the two. She made calls. Jessica sat at the table and drank the coffee and looked out Patricia's window at the morning coming over the East Hills. The light doing what early light does in Tennessee in September, which was to make everything look like it had been there since the beginning and intended to stay. Sheriff Briley arrived at 8:30. He sat across from Jessica at Patricia's table and listened to the account of the previous day with the focused attention of a man who is building a picture while you talk. He looked at the documents. He made his own calls. By 9:30, there was a deputy at the courthouse pulling the original registry records that had been sitting in the county archive undisturbed since 1952, patient in their folders through 7 decades of county business, exactly where they had been placed by the judge who had notarized Abigail's document and filed it in the proper place. By 10 o'clock, the records confirmed what the document showed. The trust registration, the date, the terms, the signature of the county judge who had notarized it in 1952 and who had died in 1978, whose signature was preserved in the county archives for exactly this kind of comparison. By 10:30, Sheriff Briley was in his vehicle heading toward Kettle Creek Road, and Jessica was in the passenger seat. Jessica rode with him. She sat in the passenger seat of the sheriff's vehicle in her mother's apron and watched the familiar road unspool through the windshield. The same road she had driven 10,000 times, the same turns and rises, and the particular view of the farm from the curve a half-mile out, where you could see the house and the barn, and beyond them, the orchard. She could see even from the road that the machines had arrived. 2 large pieces of equipment, she did not know their specific names, had never had occasion to know them, were parked in the south field at the edge of the orchard. Several men were gathered nearby. WDE's truck was in the drive. Sheriff Briley turned in without slowing, gravel under the tires, and parked in front of the house. Jessica got out before the vehicle had fully stopped. Wade came off the porch when he saw the sheriff's vehicle, with the prepared confidence of a man who has already decided how this conversation is going to go. He stopped when he saw Jessica. She was standing in the yard in her mother's apron with her hands at her sides, and the particular quality of stillness that she had developed over 74 years of living in one place and knowing exactly where she stood. She was not performing anything. She was not dramatic. She was simply present in the way of someone who is entirely certain of their position. Sheriff Briley was beside her with the documents. "Wade Puitt," the sheriff said, "I need you to look at something." What followed was the kind of conversation that legal documents make possible, the kind where one side has the actual records and the other side has an approximation of the records, and the difference between those two things becomes apparent very quickly to anyone with the experience to read them. Patricia Holt had that experience. Sheriff Briley had that experience. The deputy from the courthouse had been pulling records for 20 years and had that experience. WDE Puitt's attorney reviewing the material being presented appeared to be arriving at conclusions about his own situation that were producing visible discomfort. The deputy from the courthouse had pulled the original registry. The signature on WDE's document, compared to the county records of Robert Marsh's actual signatures, had the specific quality of something that has been reproduced rather than created, close enough to deceive someone who did not know what they were looking. She walked toward it. Behind her, she heard Sheriff Briley begin the process of placing Wade Puitt under arrest for fraud and forgery. The charges read in the flat, professional tone of someone who has done this before and is doing it correctly. She heard the particular sounds of that process, the words, the compliance or lack of it, the radio call. She kept walking.
She walked through the orchard gate and through the rows of iron trees, past the trees that were still struggling, and the ones that had not made it, and the ones that had surprised her by holding on, until she reached the central tree. The blossoms were on the lower branches in clusters, small and pale, and entirely real, entirely present, entirely impossible by any ordinary accounting of what apple trees do. In September in Tennessee, she touched one. The petals were cool and soft in the morning air, the particular fragile solidity of apple blossoms that she had known since childhood. Real flowers on a tree that had been declining for years, on a morning in September that was entirely the wrong time for this to happen. She put her hand on the trunk. The bark was warm. She thought about her mother. She thought about the letter. The roots that feed us are the same roots that protect us. And she thought about what it meant to spend a life building things that outlast you. The orchard, the coins, the document in the box, the key in the hem, the trust in the county records, patient and unchanged for 60 years, waiting for the morning it was needed. She stood under the blossoms of the iron tree, and she felt with the specific certainty of something felt rather than reasoned that her mother was aware of this morning, not in a way she could have explained or defended, just in the way of something known. "I found it, Mom," she said quietly. "I found everything you left me." The September morning was very still. The blossoms moved in a small wind. The legal resolution was thorough, which was the word Patricia Halt used when she called Jessica a week later, with the full account of what had been determined and what was proceeding and what could be expected to follow. Patricia used words carefully, which was one of the reasons Jessica had trusted her immediately, and thorough was the right word, not quick, not simple, but thorough in the way of things done properly. W.D.E. Puig's document had been produced with the assistance of the attorney who had accompanied him, a man whose license was now under review by the State Bar Association, which had received the relevant documentation with the particular interest of a body that takes fraud seriously. The forgery charges were clear, and the fraud charges were clear, and the pattern of similar activity that the investigation had uncovered in other counties made the situation clearer. Still, Wade was not, it emerged, doing this for the first time. He was doing it apparently for what would be the last. Jessica returned to the farmhouse on Kettle Creek Road on the Thursday following the arrest with the original keys recovered from W.D.E.'s possession, and a locksmith who restored the locks she preferred and changed back the ones Wade had altered. She walked through the rooms of the house with the particular quality of attention of someone returning to a familiar place after an interval that has changed them. Seeing the kitchen, the back bedroom, the room off the kitchen where the filing cabinet lived, the view from the east window over the fields, her things in their places, her life intact inside the walls where she had built it. She put the documents in the filing cabinet in the room off the kitchen where important papers lived. She put the ammunition box on the shelf in the same room, the coins still inside in their bundles, the letters still tied with kitchen string. She would deal with them properly. The coin specialist in Cookville, the Historical Society, the process of understanding the full value of what her mother had accumulated. But not today. Today she made tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked out at the garden. The following week she drove to Cookville. The man at the coin shop was a careful and precise person named Howard Briggs, who took the work of evaluation seriously and who spent 2 hours with the contents of the ammunition box before he said anything substantive. When he spoke carefully, as was his nature. He said that several of the coins were of significant numismatic value, a phrase he used with the specific weight of someone who wants to be accurate rather than dramatic. He said that the collection as a whole, representing coins from the 1880s through the 1960s, many in excellent preservation given their storage conditions, constituted a collection that a serious collector or auction house would find very interesting.
He gave her an estimate which he qualified as preliminary and subject to full appraisal. The estimate was substantial. Jessica sat with this number at Howard Briggs's workbench and thought about her mother spending 60 years keeping thank-you coins in a box under a tree. Abigail had not known what they were worth, had never been a woman who thought in those terms, had spent her life measuring value in different units entirely. She had kept them because they were gifts from people who had mattered to her, because each particular coin was a record of a specific connection and a specific kindness, because she had not been willing to let those records disappear into the ordinary entropy of time. She had kept them the way she kept everything that mattered, carefully and out of sight, and for the long term. The result 60 years later was a collection whose value exceeded anything Abigail could have imagined when she accepted the first silver dollar from a recovering soldier in Georgia in 1945. Jessica did not sell the collection. This decision came to her without deliberation and without doubt. The way certain decisions come when they are not choices but acknowledgments of what you already know. She did not sell the letters either, did not donate them to a museum or a library, though several institutions expressed interest when word of the discovery became known through the channels by which such things become known in a county where everyone knows everyone's business. She kept the letters because they were her mother's, the physical record of Abigail's quiet decades of generosity, the names and stories of the people she had helped, the evidence of a life that had done considerable good without ever asking for acknowledgement. She kept the coins because they were the material form of that same record. Each one a thank you. Each one a connection preserved. Each one proof that kindness given leaves a mark. She also replanted. This was the decision she was most certain of, the one that had formed in the orchard on the night she slept against the central tree, and that had not changed in the weeks since. Whatever the coins were worth, whatever the legal resolution produced, the orchard was going to be restored. It was not a financial decision. It was a statement about what she came from and what she intended to continue. The spring following WDE's arrest, she brought in an orchardist from the next county who had known her mother slightly and who assessed the trees with the focused attention of someone who sees what others have given up on. He said that the iron trees were not dead, that the root systems were largely intact, that the above-ground decline had been disease-related and specific, and that with proper treatment and time, a significant portion of the orchard was recoverable. He used the word recoverable with the particular emphasis of someone who knows it matters. She began the treatment program he recommended. She learned what she needed to learn. She gave the orchard the attention her mother had given it, consistent, patient, season by season. By the second spring, more than half the remaining trees had produced new growth, cautious at first, the way living things return to themselves after a long difficulty, then with increasing confidence as the season progressed. She documented this carefully, the way she documented everything so that she would know what had worked and could do more of it. By the third spring, the orchard was in full bloom for the first time in years. She stood in the orchard on a May morning in the third year, with the apple trees in full flower around her, every tree that had survived, every tree that had been given the right treatment and the right time, and the patient attention of someone who believed in them, even when they looked finished. The air carried the specific sweetness of apple blossoms that she had known since childhood, that she had breathed every April of her life on this farm, that she had been afraid in the hard months when the orchard looked like something past saving she would not smell again on this farm. The central tree was in full bloom. The first tree, the heart of the orchard. The iron tree that her mother had put in the ground when Jessica was 14 years old. She was wearing the apron. She stood under the flowering tree and thought about roots, about the ones you can see, the ones that rise from the soil and show you how deeply a tree has anchored itself, and the ones you cannot, the ones that go down into the dark earth further than any shovel reaches, holding through the drought and the disease, and the hard seasons with the patience of things that have learned to wait.
The iron trees had survived because their roots went deep enough. Her mother had survived because hers did too. And she herself had survived the night in the orchard and the morning with the sheriff and all the mornings since because of the same reason. She thought about her mother sewing a key into a hem. She thought about 60 years of letters in a box and coins wrapped in oilskin and a document in a county registry that had waited patiently for the morning it was needed. She thought about the patience of that, the absolute unshakable confidence of a woman who had prepared something for her daughter and trusted that her daughter would find it. She put her hand on the trunk of the central tree. The bark was warm with the May morning, the particular warmth of a living thing that has survived what it was not supposed to survive and is now quietly flourishing. Abigail had planted this tree when she was 42 years old. She had planted it with the intention that it would outlast her, and it had, and she had also planted it with the intention that it would be there for Jessica, and it had been, and it had held under its roots for 60 years, everything Jessica had needed. She thought, I come from someone who built things that last. She thought about the letters in the box, each one a thread of connection that Abigail had maintained through the years without expectation. She thought about the coins, the silver dollar from 1920, the walking Liberty half-dollar that had been a grandmother's keepsake, and the dozens of others, each one carried by someone who had wanted to give something back to the woman who had given it to them. She thought about the document in the county registry, patient in its folder for 60 years, undisturbed, waiting. She thought, I intend to do the same. The orchard bloomed around her in that May morning, the iron trees doing what her mother had always believed they would do given the right conditions and enough time. If this story touched you, hit that like button so this story of a mother's lasting love can reach more people who need it today. And I want to ask you something before you go. Think about Abigail, the key sewn into the hem, the box under the roots, the 60 years of quiet faith that her daughter would find what she needed. If you had to describe that kind of love in just one single word, what would your word be? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. A warm embrace to each and every one of you. I will see you in the next story.